Hello, everyone. It is another bite-sized moment with your IEF. Today, we are looking at our new collaborative planning and lesson plan template. What you have noticed so far is that everything is all in one, so there's not two separate documents. When you're having your collaborative planning meetings, when you're meeting together, we want those times to be intentional and to really talk about the data and looking forward to the next week. So, what we're going to through today is just some details within this document before you're uploading it and what to expect each week when we're in facilitating and going through your collaborative planning protocol. So, I am going to pick on our world geography department today as we go through and deconstruct some of their standards. So, if you're not really a social studies person, so sorry, but I think that this would definitely be informational and good for you to use as well as you go through and do your own content because you are your content expert. And so this will be much easier when you're actually doing it with your standards. So shout out to Mr. Davis and Ms. Sanchez in our ninth grade academy. I'm going to be using you today. I just threw myself in the loop because it just kind of makes it a little bit easier. So, of course, we're going to start off with our CSIP goals, which is to increase the percentage of students present more than 90%, which is our attendance goal. Our goal number 2 is to increase literacy, especially within our ninth grade academy, but all school wide. And then for goal 3 is to increase our graduation rate, which we all have an active part in making sure that that happens. So let's just be reminded of where our goals are and what we want the outcome to be. So this first part of our document, notice that this is already filled out because I wanted this to be an exemplar for you to be able to know exactly what your lesson plans should look like when you are completing them and you're having the conversation. So it starts off with our unit standards. Notice it is not by week, it's more or less by unit. So before you actually enter into the next unit, you should be deconstructing your standards. Now, for some contents, this is pretty much going to stay the same from week to week. It could change just depending on how it outlines. I know for science, it's a new standard each day. So you might highlight a little bit more of your focus standards versus our ELA department is different because they kind of focus on the standard for a while. So that will be kind of tailored depending on your department, but the process is still the same, and that's what we're going to get to today. So it says complete the table for your unit standards and highlight this week's focus standards. So you're going to go ahead and break down each unit. Notice I didn't really highlight this one because this could be over a matter of the unit. But I do know that I'm focusing on this element for the week. Okay, and you might have 2 elements, you might have 3 elements, might have 3 standards, you might have 1 standard. It just really depends on the content. But for the purposes of this video and for a learning moment, we're just going through the basics of a standard. So I highlighted what I would be focusing on this week if I were to be teaching the standard of North America's physical characteristics and settlement patterns. And it also has some descriptions for me as well. Now, we can pull the standards from Georgia DOE. We can pull the standards from Henry Connects. You can pull your standards pretty much. They're accessible to you. The language is the same. Is going to be the same because it comes from the state down. So your standard goes there. Okay. The second box or the second column is going to focus on what students need to know to reach the achievement level for this standard. When we think about achievement levels, think about ALDs, your achievement level descriptors. Are we trying to get students, or if our students are at the beginning, we're trying to get them to be proficient and really to get them to the distinguished level. But what language and what things do they need to know? What do they need to understand? What concepts do they need to have in order for them to actually even reach those proficient and distinguished levels? So this is where you're really breaking down and you're analyzing. Think about academic knowledge. In our academic vocabulary, is there certain words that you need to use because you've already previewed your data and you kind of know what those next next formatives and unit assessments look like, so you have an idea of what terminology and things that you need to put in. For instance, here, if I'm trying to get students to identify and describe climates and locations and physical features, I need to first make sure that students can explain why physical characteristics of a place act as a contributing factors to world settlement. I need to be able to make sure that they can compare and contrast different categories of the features that we see on maps. They need to be able to locate and know the difference between locations. Is it landlocked? Does it have access to water? Those things that you just need to know in order to really determine why people live where they live. Okay. This last column is going to look at what do they need to do in order to reach the proficient and distinguished level. What evidence will be completed to show students learning? Think of this as your product. What is the outcome? What activity do I have? What assignment is going to help me understand that students are on their way to being proficient or distinguished? Think of that final product that students are going to have. For instance, in this situation, I put a map activity. This would give me a clearer description if they really understand the major physical features and how they all work together. I'm going to have students compare physical features. I'm going to give them a series of maps to be able to do that, including the features that were listed in the standard. I'm also going to have them determine the major cities and populations to see if that also correlates with what they have seen on the series of maps that they were presented. I'm going to have them write a summary to see what they have actually interpreted and using it in their own words. Then I also might even do what we call a geographer's conference, where I have students in groups and they're given different regions so that they can analyze the maps within their self, which is kind of the higher order thinking. And then they can go around and take notes on each other's presentation, and they can also use a graphic organizer, things of that nature to help them explain the regions. So these are all things of what you want to think in depth that's going to get them to proficient or distinguished. So then as we go down through the document, it goes into misconceptions. And we all know that our misconceptions are really the critical things that we need to address first. That is going to help our students who are struggling to master the standard. And what will they have misconceptions about? Sometimes we do have this spot on, but as we see this generation changing, we find that misconceptions can come up at various times of our teaching. So when you do your misconceptions, these are things that you're just kind of planning for. For instance, here I have relative location of regions outlined in the standard are different from continent regions that students know. So we might assume that the Middle East is one thing, but when we look at it on our regions, or if we're splitting it down by regions of the standard, it is actually going to be categorized as a different region. So just making sure that students understand the language and that it's the same amongst. You kind of already did that as well up here, but you're going to go a little bit more into detail with your misconceptions. So when we get down to pre-work data analysis, this is more for what we are currently in. When we start talking about our data is happening in real time. And so we don't want to move so far advanced that we're not actually looking at the information that is currently taking place. Let's go ahead and hit those target areas first, right? Our re-engagement is so important because it is not so much a reteaching, but it's getting the students to really actively engage with the material that they've already possibly missed. Are we doing small groups? Is this going to be a whole group? What are we actually doing here? So notice I took a formative and I put physical geography. And this is where we're starting to pull the data from Illuminate, or better known now as Renaissance. You have a matrix report when you go to Renaissance, and when you click on your assessment, and I'm not here to pick on nobody, but I'm just here to show you where to find it. When you click on your assessment, you have here your frequency. You have a frequency response frequency report that you can pull, and you have a matrix report that you can pull fast, right? But if there's other reports that you want to pull, you can always go to reports. But these two are the main ones that we're going to be referencing as it pertains to your new document. So here I pulled the matrix report. When you pull the matrix report, you're going to change question into standards. And I'm going to show you that real quickly. So when you pull your matrix report, it is going to look like this. And then it's going to say group by. Your group by is going to be from question to standard. The reason why we're going to put it in the standards because most of the time our formatives and definitely our summatives are going to test or assess multiple standards at once. So we want to make sure that we are breaking down the data and being very intentional about it. And luckily it already does it for us. The first thing, as you can see here, and I will zoom in. As you can see here, I put in my matrix report. I screenshotted. These are all guiding questions that you should talk through with your team as you're analyzing your data and talking through your data. So for teacher one, let's say that this is the screenshot of the matrix that this person has. Notice that you can see the questions. You can see that questions 1 and 2 focused on one standard. This one is a little bit better. 1 and 2 focused on one standard, while 3, 4, and 5 focused on a different standard. Based off of the percentages and the columns, I can tell you right now, as a whole group, we need to go over the standard 1. And because we're only at 17% correct, versus standard 2, we also need to recover as well, but we can cover. We might be able to cover this in small group instruction versus whole group because it's some things that it seems like students know about this standard. So just figuring out what the misconception was here. So you want to split it by standard. Once you get this is where your discussion starts because you can see it. Now, when you go to Illuminate or Renaissance, you can actually click these questions so you can see exactly what the questions are and what they're asking, which brings us in this area of concerns. We're looking at those most missed questions and rationale. Access the response frequency report that is on Illuminate. So this is the report that you're going to pull for this. And it gives you a more overall look. So if I were looking here, this is where we figure out response frequency. If I'm looking at question number 3, I can click this and it will pull up question 3 for me. And it also should give you the depth of knowledge so you can see how deep this question actually went. It also gives you a rationale as to why this question is correct, but it also tells you why the other questions are incorrect. It then also tells you the number of students that got it correct, right? Based on here, we know that this was the A, C, and E was the correct answer, but we had some students mixed up here, which was another high distractor. So we can see that letter B is definitely a distractor for question number 3. So I will just go back and look at the answer choice for B, read it with my team, talk about this, and figure out what students really needed to understand in order to, and figure out why students might have chosen this question. So that's what you're doing. You're talking through that with your team as you're breaking down the data, and then you're putting this snapshot into the plan as well. We're really focusing on the first 4. However, I can say, and this is really very much made up data. This is not actual data. I just pulled some random reports. But let's say that this was our question. We do a rationale for question number 1. The question is, how do the Rocky Mountains affect development of population of those areas in America? My rationale with the mountains, less population density is probable due to the climate, difficulty with living conditions, barrier to migration. These are things that I figure students probably do not understand, and that is why that was a distractor. Notice that the distractor here would have probably been C, and we also possibly could have looked at B as well. So then we go right down into re-engagement. Feel free to pause this video if you need to go back. Whatever needs to happen do what is best for you. But now let's get into re-engagement. Re-engagement is going to be where we're planning intentionally for our students to be able to go back into the material and to get it and address it in a different way. So I can put my focus standard here. I'm answering these guided questions and I'm filling them in with my team, but I'm also filling them based off my students, because what my students might need might be different from my teammate. So I want to be sure to go ahead and put in, I underlined some things in here because I want to show you how this is actually going to align with my actual lesson plan. So when you're planning for re-engagement, it's not so much a list, but it's the intentionality that you're putting into what we call instructional focus. And unfortunately, for some reason, when I was filling this out, I did not complete my instructional focus for Tuesday. So when you're doing your lesson plan, this is it's active because we haven't had Thursday yet. So technically it's an active lesson plan. So when you're doing your lesson plan, which your document goes straight into it, and that's the bell. We know what that means. So you want to go into your instructional focus, planning intentionally for what you have already outlined in your re-engagement and based off of what you see, because this should be happening in real time. When you do this, you're going to specify what you're doing in instructional focus that's going to gear students towards the re-engagement. You want to have your learning targets outlined. Notice that your standards is not here anymore. That's because you've already broken down your standards in the above area. So all of this is kind of running along. You want to make sure your learning targets are outlined. You want to activate the students' learning, making it very intentional. Notice that the boxes are filled out to a point where if someone is to come in your room, they know exactly what is happening without you having to explain it, because it's already explained in your lesson plan. Your plan should be thorough enough that it is not just so much you just are clicking through, or I just put a quick phrase or fragment sentence, but I am actually putting in what we are doing and explaining what this would look like if you come into my classroom. So notice here you have a I do, a we do, and a you do, and it's fully, and you have a closing that it goes fully into detail about what teachers are doing, what students are doing, what the expectation is. Notice on Tuesday it looks a little bit different because my lesson it might be a little bit different. It might not call for us to do all three parts. It might call us to do a we do, and then we need to split into students are doing, and then we need to go into a closing or a summary. So be very intentional about how you are planning your lesson and be thorough in what you are saying. We're not asking you to write a book, but we're just asking you to be a little bit more insightful as to what we should be expecting when we're coming into the classrooms. You want to look at this top part as well. When we say week of, it should be what the next week is looking like, not if you have a week 8 template or a week 9 template, please make sure you're specifying the actual dates that are happening in current time. Also, be sure to put your name at the bottom because you are responsible for uploading your lesson plan to your folder. So, although you are working collaboratively, please make sure that you are actually putting your lesson plan into your folder and making any adjustments that you need to for your class, because we have some teachers that are teaching AP, some teachers that are teaching honors courses that are a little different from your students. And we have different students, right? We collab together, we plan together, but I still have to do some assignments that are better for my students that might be a little bit different for the other teacher. So these are all things to take into mind or take into consideration when you are planning for your instruction. Hopefully this video was informative for you as you go through. Notice the little details, the minor details, but hopefully this makes it a more intentional conversation as you start when you are planning for instruction. We're expecting to see this happen in October, and we will have a professional development next week where we will go through this and we'll go through data analysis. So this has been your bite-sized moment. Thank you so much for your time. Feel free to stop it, record, go back, all that good stuff, or stop by and see me in my office, and I'll be glad to go over this even more in detail with you. All right, have a great day. Bye, Dutchtown.